The clinking of champagne glasses echoed like gunshots in my ears. Everyone gathered in Dad's mansion that night knew what was about to happen. The reading of his will. My nephew, Cody, strutted across the marble floors in his Armani suit, smirking like he'd already won. And maybe he had. Because when the lawyer opened the envelope and announced that Cody would inherit Dad's $36 million empire, 3 estates, a fleet of Teslas, and the family business, applause roared through the room. And me, his only son? The lawyer handed me a battered metal toolbox. Dusty, dented, locked tight. The room erupted in laughter, my relatives whispering that I'd been cut out because I was worthless. I wanted to crawl into the floor, but inside that toolbox was a secret, one that would tear their smiles apart and destroy everything they thought they had secured. But what I didn't know was, the mahogany-paneled hall of my father's estate smelled of cigar smoke and polished leather, the air thick with money and judgment. A chandelier blazed above us, its crystal light catching on Rolex watches and diamond bracelets as relatives gathered around the long oak table. The lawyer cleared his throat, his silver glasses flashing under the light. Everyone leaned forward. Everyone but me. I sat near the end of the table, my hands rough from years of construction work, my suit borrowed and a size too tight. My younger cousins whispered, barely bothering to hide their smirks. To them, I was already the loser, the contractor who never made it big. The lawyer's voice cut through the room like a gavel. To my grandson, Cody Whitmore, I leave the Whitmore empire, estates, businesses, investments, and all holdings, valued at $36 million. Gasps. Applause. Cody adjusted his Armani cufflinks, stood with a practiced grin, and gave a mock bow as if accepting a crown. The room swelled with pride. My nephew, Dad's golden boy, is now the heir. Then silence fell. And to my son, Michael, the lawyer hesitated, shifting uncomfortably before producing a battered, dented metal toolbox. Its red paint was chipped, its handle worn. He placed it in front of me like a judge dropping a sentence. I leave this. The room erupted with muffled laughter. Guess Dad finally admitted Michael was a failure, one uncle muttered. Maybe it's full of nails. Perfect for the handyman, another cousin snickered. Heat burned up my neck. My chest tightened. Cody leaned across the table, his teeth gleaming like a wolf's. Hope there's at least duct tape in there for you, Uncle. You'll need it to fix that broken life of yours. The table roared with laughter. Even my own brother covered his smirk with a cough. I stared at the toolbox, my reflection warped in its rusted surface. My father, my own father, had left Cody an empire and left me a joke. A box of junk to prove, once and for all, that I was nothing. I wanted to shout, to slam my fists, to demand an explanation. But the words died in my throat. Instead, I lowered my head as the laughter echoed off marble floors, each chuckle like a hammer striking nails into my coffin of shame. For years, I had carried the weight of being less than, less successful, less refined, less worthy. And now, my father's will had cemented it in stone. I gripped the handle of the toolbox, my knuckles white. It felt heavier than it looked, heavier than a joke should be. My breath came shallow as I forced myself not to crumble in front of them. I told myself it was just scrap, just another reminder that I had been forgotten. But deep down, a flicker of something I couldn't name stirred inside me. Because what I didn't know was that the toolbox wasn't junk. It was the fuse to everything. Cody was born into privilege, and the family treated him like royalty from the very beginning. I can still see the snapshots in my mind. Cody as a toddler in tailored suits at Christmas dinners, Cody's name stitched into his private school blazer, Cody stepping out of a brand new BMW on his 16th birthday while the rest of us clapped like trained seals. Meanwhile, I was out back in Dad's workshop, sanding wood until my hands blistered, building tables and cabinets just to scrape by. I wasn't offered piano lessons, fencing clubs, or private tutors. I was offered overtime, second jobs, and calluses. Michael, Dad would sigh at every family dinner, his voice thick with disappointment. Why can't you be more like Cody? He's the future of this family. The words carved into me deeper than any tool ever could. I swallowed them with every bite of roast beef, every clink of crystal glasses, and all the while Cody would flash that smug smile across the table, Rolex gleaming under the chandelier like a trophy he didn't earn. By 18, he had not one but 2 cars, a silver Tesla and a cherry red Mustang restored just for him. I had a rusted Ford truck that coughed smoke every morning. Cody got applause for arriving in style. I got laughed at for arriving covered in dust. The family's love was a currency, and I couldn't afford it. Even my marriage buckled under the weight of being less. My ex-wife, Amanda, used to say she loved how hard I worked, how I built things with my hands. But love doesn't pay for vacations in Paris. Love doesn't sparkle like diamond bracelets. When she met a man with money, someone who could buy her the life Cody flaunted, she packed her bags and left. She didn't even hide the truth. "Michael, I can't keep living small," she said, slamming the door on the only life I knew. That was the moment I realized shame doesn't just sit quietly in the corner of your life. It walks into your home, eats dinner at your table, and eventually drives away with your wife. Cody, on the other hand, never had to beg for respect. He collected it like he collected cars, watches, and girlfriends. Dad paraded him around the boardroom, called him the heir, long before the will ever made it official. Cody walked through life on polished marble floors, while I stumbled barefoot over broken glass. At every turn, I was invisible. Blue-collar trash in their eyes. The forgotten son, and yet, in the rare moments when I let myself breathe, I remembered one thing. My grandmother's eyes. They never looked at me with pity, never compared me to Cody. She had once whispered words to me that echoed in my memory, sharp and clear, like a secret waiting to surface. "Michael, you're not what they say you are. One day they'll see." I never understood what she meant. Not then. But my grandmother never saw things the way Dad did. Grandma Eleanor was the only person who ever looked at me without that sting of disappointment in her eyes. While Dad measured me against Cody's shiny report cards and polished shoes, Grandma measured me by something quieter, something I couldn't see back then. I was 8 years old the first time she told me, her hands guiding mine as I tried to hammer a crooked nail straight into a block of wood. The nail bent sideways, and Cody, standing behind me in his pressed polo shirt, laughed until his cheeks turned red. I wanted to throw the hammer down, crawl into a hole, and disappear. But Grandma placed her wrinkled hand over mine and whispered, "Michael, when people laugh at you, that's when you're holding the biggest secret. Don't forget it." I didn't understand. How could being laughed at be anything but shameful? But her eyes, as hard as flint and soft as sunlight, made me believe there was something she saw that nobody else did. Years passed, and Cody's shadow grew taller while mine shrank. Every family dinner was another round of applause for him, another reminder that I was the forgotten one. And yet, every time I felt myself drowning in shame, I heard her voice again, faint but steady. "That's when you're holding the biggest secret." The last time I saw her, she was lying in a hospital bed, her hair silver against the white pillow, her body frail but her spirit unbroken. She reached out, her hand cool but steady as it clasped mine. "Michael," she said, her voice raspy but strong enough to cut through the beeping monitors, "one day, you'll understand why your father underestimated you." I tried to smile, tried to hold back the tears, but I couldn't. "Grandma, I don't think I ever will. He's made it clear I'll never measure up." She squeezed my hand tighter than I thought she could. "Your father sees the world through money and pride. That's his blindness. But you," she stopped, catching her breath, "you'll see beyond what glitters. And when that day comes, you'll realize you were the one holding the key all along." She passed away 2 days later. Those words haunted me for years. At first, they felt like cruel hope, a dying woman's attempt to comfort her grandson. But the older I got, the more they gnawed at me, the more they refused to fade. And now, standing in the quiet of my apartment, the weight of humiliation from the will reading still burning in my chest, I found myself staring at the one thing nobody else cared about, the old, battered toolbox. Dad's last gift to me. The cousins had laughed. Cody had mocked. The lawyer had pitied. But Grandma's words pulsed through me now like a drumbeat. "One day you'll understand." I stared at the rusted hinges, the faded handle, the stubborn lock keeping its secrets sealed inside. And that box still sat in my closet, waiting to be opened. The estate never looked more like a palace. Crystal chandeliers glittered in every room. casting golden light on marble floors polished so bright they nearly blinded me. Outside, luxury cars lined the driveway, Lamborghinis, Teslas, a Bentley or two, all gleaming under the floodlights like trophies on display. A champagne fountain bubbled in the grand hall while waiters in white gloves drifted through the crowd with silver trays stacked with hors d'oeuvres I couldn't even pronounce. And at the center of it all was Cody, my nephew, the chosen heir. His Armani tuxedo fit him like a second skin, a Rolex flashing every time he raised his glass to accept yet another toast. Guests surrounded him, clinking glasses and calling him the heir of the empire. Women leaned in too close. Men slapped their backs like they'd just conquered Rome. The whole evening was a coronation, and Cody was lapping it up like a king crowned at 25. I didn't want to be there. Every fiber of my body screamed at me to stay home to avoid this circus of arrogance. But some twisted sense of duty, or maybe masochism, dragged me through those doors. Maybe I thought showing up would prove something to someone even if it was just myself. From the moment I stepped into the hall, I knew I didn't belong. My shoes felt too scuffed for the marble, my jacket too plain for the silk and velvet around me. I might as well have been wearing a neon sign that said, "Outsider." And Cody, he noticed instantly. "Well, well," he said loudly enough for half the room to hear, a smirk curving his lips. "Look who finally decided to crawl out of his workshop." Laughter rippled through the crowd. My stomach twisted. Cody stepped closer, the smugness radiating off him like heat. "Uncle Michael, this house isn't for broke contractors." But maybe you can fix the plumbing if something breaks down. The laughter grew louder this time, sharper. My face burned. People turned away, hiding smiles behind champagne glasses, but their eyes betrayed them. I could feel them cutting into me, carving me down to nothing. I clenched my fists so tight my nails dug into my palms. For a moment, I actually thought about turning around and walking out, letting them have their victory. The shame was too heavy, pressing down like a weight I couldn't lift. I turned, ready to leave, ready to disappear into the night and never look back. But before I could take a step, I felt a hand grab my arm. Firm. Urgent. I turned, startled, and saw a man I didn't recognize. His suit was plain compared to the others, his eyes sharp, focused. He leaned in close, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your father wanted me to give you this." The man's grip was steady, his gaze locked onto mine like he'd been waiting years for this moment. The laughter and clinking glasses from Cody's celebration faded into the background as he leaned closer. "My name is Mr. Harris," he said, voice low but deliberate. "I was your father's private attorney. Not the one they know about, the one he trusted." I froze. My father had secrets I thought I'd never touch, but this man's presence alone told me otherwise. Harris slipped his hand inside his jacket and pulled out a small envelope, sealed and worn at the edges. My breath caught when I saw the handwriting across the front. It was unmistakable. My father's. For years, I'd seen those same sharp strokes on contracts, letters, even the scrawled notes he used to leave on the fridge. And now, here it was again, in my hands, long after he was gone. "Michael," Harris said, his tone urgent but gentle, "this was meant for you, and you alone." He told me to wait until the time was right. That time is now. I stared down at the envelope, my hands trembling as if it were made of fire. With every heartbeat, the humiliation from earlier twisted tighter inside me. Cody's smirk, the laughter, the whispers, and now this? I tore the seal carefully, almost afraid the paper might disintegrate from the weight of its importance. Inside was a single handwritten note. "Michael, the truth is in the toolbox. Do not let them fool you." Dad, the words nearly knocked the breath from my lungs. The toolbox. The old, rusted thing that everyone laughed at. The one Cody mocked in front of the entire family. Could Dad really have hidden something there? Why give Cody the empire but tell me the truth was in that box? I looked up, but Harris was already gone, slipping into the crowd like a shadow. My pulse thundered in my ears as I shoved the letter inside my jacket and left the mansion. I didn't even glance back at Cody's glittering circus. The drive home was a blur of headlights and questions. My hands gripped the wheel so hard they hurt. By the time I reached my apartment, my chest felt like it might explode. I yanked the closet door open, dragging the dented old toolbox into the light. The metal was cold, the lock stiff with years of neglect. My hands shook as I fumbled with it, Dad's words echoing in my head. The truth is in the toolbox. I grabbed a crowbar from under the sink, wedged it into the latch, and pried with every ounce of strength I had. The lock groaned, metal snapping under the force. My breath caught as the lid creaked open, the shadows inside swallowing me whole. And in that instant, I knew, the moment I opened it, my entire world shifted. The toolbox groaned open, the lid scraping like it hadn't been touched in years. Inside, instead of rusted nails or broken tools, lay something entirely different. At the top was a bound leather diary, its edges worn, the pages yellowed. My hands trembled as I lifted it, the familiar smell of my father's study rising from the paper. Beneath it, a stack of bank documents neatly tied with a string. And at the very bottom, a folder marked in bold letters. Will. Original drafts. My chest tightened. I set the diary on the table and flipped open the folder first. Page after page revealed clean, original drafts of my father's will, each one typed, dated, and signed with his unmistakable hand. In every version, the estate wasn't left solely to Cody. It was split fairly, half to him, half to me. But those drafts were never the ones read in the grand estate. I swallowed hard and pulled the next set of papers into the light. They were riddled with corrections, amendments, sloppy signatures that didn't quite match. Notes in the margins, scrawled in Cody's mother's handwriting. A sinking realization spread through me. My father's will had been altered while he was sick, too weak to fight back. I flipped to the bank documents, each page heavier than the last. Offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Transfers routed through shell companies. Millions siphoned quietly from the empire's core. My stomach turned as the numbers stacked up, $3 million here, $12 million there, a final tally of $36 million redirected into Cody's control. A cold fury rose in me. This wasn't inheritance. This wasn't a father's choice. This was theft, calculated and ruthless, dressed up as legacy. My hands shook as I opened the diary, my father's handwriting filling the pages in deliberate strokes. The first entries were about business, meetings, and daily reflections. But as I turned the pages, his words grew heavier, darker. Michael, I fear Cody has been manipulating me. His mother whispers in my ear when I'm too tired to argue. They've brought papers I don't remember signing. My memory slips, and I wonder if I'm being fooled in my weakest hours. Tears blurred my vision, but I forced myself to keep reading. If you're holding this, it means they succeeded. But you must know, my empire was not meant for greed. Michael, you are the rightful heir. Cody cannot be trusted. I've hidden the evidence here. Do not let them win. I slammed the diary shut, my pulse racing. The toolbox that Cody mocked, the janitor's prize, held the truth that could burn their empire to the ground. I stared at the papers, fury and disbelief warring inside me. For the first time, I felt hope. My father hadn't abandoned me. He had trusted me with everything. And yet, one thought cut through the storm like a knife. If Cody forged documents, this wasn't inheritance. It was fraud. I didn't wait a week. I didn't wait a day. By dawn the next morning, I was standing in front of the estate's massive double doors, toolbox in one hand, my father's diary clutched in the other. My chest burned with rage, but underneath it all pulsed a quiet determination I hadn't felt in years. The doors swung open, and I stepped into the marble hall where laughter, clinking glasses, and the faint smell of champagne filled the air. Cody's victory party was still in full swing. All eyes turned to me. "Well, look who crawled back," Cody sneered from the staircase, his Rolex glinting under the chandelier. "What's the matter, Uncle? Did the toolbox run out of screws already?" The crowd chuckled. My aunt leaned over to her friend, stage whispering, "Guess Dad finally admitted Michael was the failure." My fists tightened around the diary. I walked past them all, slow and deliberate, until I reached the long glass coffee table in the center of the room. Then, without a word, I dropped the toolbox onto it with a heavy thud. The sound silenced the room. I pulled out the diary, the folders, the bank slips, the original drafts of the will, and I spread them across the glass like a dealer laying down a winning hand. "This," I said, my voice steady, "is the truth." For a moment no one spoke. Then Cody's mother, her face tightening like a vice, let out a bitter laugh. "Michael," she spat, "all you've got are Dad's bedtime stories and some dusty old paperwork. Do you really expect anyone to believe you?" I didn't flinch. Instead, I held up 2 pages side by side, one with my father's strong, practiced signature, and another with a crooked forgery. "Tell me," I said, raising my voice so everyone could hear, "does this look like the same hand to you?" Gasps rippled through the room. An uncle leaned closer, squinting, and muttered, That's not George's writing." I tossed down the bank slips next. Numbers screamed from the pages, millions funneled offshore, transactions signed by Cody himself. "You think Dad left you an empire?" I said, my eyes locking onto Cody's pale face. "No, you stole it. You and your mother forged documents, siphoned accounts, and bled him dry while he was too sick to fight back." Cody's smirk vanished. His lips parted, but no sound came out. His mother's face burned crimson as she shouted over me, "Lies! All of it. He's just jealous." But the room was no longer on their side. Guests whispered. Cousins exchanged uneasy glances, and uncles and aunts shifted uncomfortably. The air was thick, heavy, electric. For the first time in my life, I stood taller than all of them. My shame was gone, replaced with fire, and just when Cody tried to stammer an excuse, the front doors creaked open. The crowd turned. There stood Mr. Harris, my father's private attorney, a thick envelope in his hand. His voice cut like a blade through the silence. "And I have something even Cody can't deny." The room froze as Mr. Harris stepped forward, the weight of his presence cutting through the chaos like a blade. In his hands was not just an envelope. It was judgment. He placed it carefully on the coffee table, right on top of Cody's trembling pile of excuses. "You all wanted proof," Harris said evenly. "Well, your father made sure his voice would be heard, even after death." My heart slammed against my ribs. He clicked open a sleek black case and pulled out a small tablet. With a steady finger, he tapped the screen. The lights dimmed, the murmurs hushed, and suddenly my father's face filled the room. He looked frailer than I remembered. Pale skin, weary eyes, but his voice was still strong, deliberate, every syllable sharpened with purpose. "If you are watching this," he began, "then I am gone, and my worst fears have likely come true." He paused, inhaling deeply. "Cody, my grandson, you are clever, but your cleverness has rotted into greed. You forged my signature. You stole from my accounts. You poisoned this family with lies." Gasps echoed across the hall. Cody staggered back, his face draining of color. Dad's eyes turned toward the camera, and I swear, in that moment, it felt like he was staring directly into my soul. "But Michael," his voice softened, "you were always the one I trusted. Not because of wealth, not because of power, but because you lived by your hands, your grit, your honesty. That's what builds a true legacy. You are the rightful heir to everything I've built. Not Cody, not his mother. You." My knees nearly buckled. The room around me blurred with shock and murmurs. But my father's words cut through it all like a lighthouse in a storm. Dad coughed, his body visibly weak, but his final words burned with conviction. "This is my will. This is my choice. And if they try to deny it, remember, I prepared the evidence. Michael, you hold the truth." The screen faded to black. Silence. Thick, heavy, suffocating. Then all at once the room erupted, guests gasping, cousins whispering fiercely, uncles muttering prayers. A lawyer from the corner stepped forward, nodding gravely. "This testimony was notarized, authenticated, and filed under private seal," he confirmed. "It is legally binding." I turned to Cody. His arrogance, once unshakable, now cracked like shattered glass. His jaw twitched, his lips trembled. For the first time he had no smirk, no comeback, only fear. His mother reached for his arm, but he yanked it away, sweat streaking down his forehead. The empire he thought he owned was dissolving right in front of him, and there was nothing he could do. For the first time, I stood tall, not as a failure, not as the shadow, but as the heir. But even as the victory burned bright in my chest, the diary called to me, heavy in my hand. Because hidden between its pages was one more truth, a secret not about Cody, but about my father himself. The headlines hit like thunder the very next morning. Local heir exposed in $36 million fraud scandal. Cody and mother under investigation for forgery, theft. Within days, the courts moved in. I stood on the marble steps of the courthouse as officers marched past me, their arms stacked with boxes of files and evidence I had pulled from that dusty toolbox. One by one, the symbols of Cody's so-called empire vanished. The mansions were seized. The garages, once lined with Teslas and vintage sports cars, were stripped bare as tow trucks hauled them away. His Rolex collection, 15 watches gleaming in glass cases, was cataloged and locked in evidence. Even the condos he bragged about in Miami and New York were frozen, repossessed as ill-gotten gains. I watched from a distance, not with glee but with a strange, quiet satisfaction. For once, the golden boy couldn't buy his way out. Cody and his mother stood in court, their lawyers scrambling with hollow arguments, but the truth was ironclad. The forged signatures, the offshore transfers, the bribes, it was all there, written in black and white. When the judge's gavel struck, the sound echoed like final justice. Fraud charges were filed. Cody and his mother's names, once dripping with prestige, became synonymous with disgrace. And me. I walked out of that courtroom carrying the judgment that changed everything. The empire was mine. The entire $36 million, businesses, estates, assets, all restored to me as the rightful heir. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the invisible one. The community that had once whispered behind my back now saw me in a new light. Old colleagues approached me with firm handshakes. Neighbors who once pitied me now offered respect. Even the business world, where Cody had strutted like a king, began calling my name instead. And Cody, the golden child, couldn't walk down the street without hearing the whispers of betrayal. Friends he had flaunted for years vanished overnight. Invitations stopped. Respect evaporated. He was left alone with nothing but his shame and the shadow of the empire he had tried to steal. I should have felt triumph, and in part I did. Vindication has a taste, sharp, powerful, and undeniable. For once, the balance was restored. I wasn't the fool. I wasn't the failure. I was the heir. But late that night, as I sat in the quiet of the mansion that was now mine, surrounded by everything I'd been denied for years, a strange emptiness crept in. The cars, the houses, the money, it wasn't filling the hollow place inside me. Because the truth was, the victory wasn't in what I owned. It was in what I had finally discovered about myself. But the money wasn't what changed me. It was what came after. I used to think losing everything in front of my family was the end of me. I thought shame defined me, that humiliation was permanent, and that my father had written me off for good. But standing here now, I see the truth. I didn't need a $36 million empire to prove my worth. I didn't need Rolexes, Teslas, or marble estates to validate my place in this family. Because the real inheritance wasn't money. It was finally learning who I was and what I was capable of when pushed to the edge. The first thing I did wasn't to buy another mansion. Instead, I found a small, modest home, one that felt mine, not a stage for people to parade wealth. Then I turned to Dad's company. For years, it had been poisoned by greed, favoritism, and arrogance. I reopened it with a new mission: honesty, fairness, opportunity. Workers who once felt overlooked found their voices again. Contracts returned. The doors weren't just open for business. They were open for hope. But I didn't stop there. I remembered the toolbox, the very thing they mocked me for. That old box became my symbol of resilience. Inside, it was proof of betrayal. Yes, but also the reminder that I had built my life with my hands, and I could build something greater with my choices. So I funded scholarships for working-class kids like me, the ones told they'd never measure up, the ones laughed at because they didn't fit the mold of success. I wanted them to know they had value, no matter how the world measured them. I built not an empire of greed, but a legacy of truth. Late one night, I sat at my desk, Dad's diary open in front of me. The pages smelled of old leather, the ink slightly faded, but his words were as sharp as the day he wrote them. I closed it slowly, placed my hand on the cover, and whispered, "Thank you for trusting me when no one else did." For the first time in years, I felt peace. And now I ask you, watching my story unfold, what would you do? If your nephew stole $36 million and left you with nothing but a dusty old toolbox, would you walk away in silence? Or would you fight back, even when the world laughed in your face? Because sometimes the smallest gift holds the biggest truth, and the only way to find it is to never give up. So, if you've been betrayed, mocked, or cast aside, remember this: your worth is not in what they give you. It's in what you choose to do next. For more stories of betrayal, revenge, and redemption, subscribe now.